Hi, I'm Tom Collins, Executive Director of Clean Elections, Arizona's voter education agency. You're here today watching one of our subject matter expert videos, which are a series of videos that we've put together to bring to Arizona voters more information and more depth on the issues that we'll be deciding on the ballot in November, either through initiatives and referendums or through the candidates that we choose from federal office all the way down to local office. You can find all that information on our website. Today with us is Professor Irasema Coronado, who is the director and professor at the School of Transborder Studies at Arizona State University. A wonderful expert to have here today, and we're so excited. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here today.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the border, which is, a big buzz word of the election cycle. But one of the things we wanted to step back a little bit and talk about is what it means to be on the border and to deal with things like immigration from an economic perspective. How does our location and the relationship among people and goods and commerce, how do those come together here in Arizona in a way that affects us?
Well, for borderlanders, for people who live on the border, who actually cross the border, who interact with both economies, it's an easy way of life. You have many people from Arizona that travel to Sonora for medical care, for dental care, for pharmaceuticals, and so they rely a lot on easy access to the Mexican economy and the ability to come back to the United States, right? So it's something that people don't fully understand, but a lot of people in southern Arizona and in other parts of Arizona go to Mexico for cheaper goods and cheaper services, and they have to come back. And so they're part of that population that's also entering the United States, and how do we facilitate their entry back into the U.S.? So that's something that people very seldom talk about. Yeah. We also know that there are people that have been here for generations that are not immigrants, that have families in Mexico that also go visit their families. And so how do you allow for family visits, for religious purposes, for people to come and go? Yeah. So that also deals with border management. Sure. And then there's this whole rhetoric of, the invasion, the hordes, the masses coming, right? And that's part of a global phenomena. Mm-hmm. The most recent data indicates that all over the world, there's 250 million on the move. Mm-hmm. And the reason why they're leaving is due to a variety of reasons. Yeah. It has to do with economic necessity. It has to do with climate change. It has to do with political instability. And so it's not just the U.S. that is seeing this influx of immigrants. It's everywhere. The European Union is also dealing with this. Yeah. And so how is it that you deal with the legacies of colonialism, imperialism, and globalization? Mm-hmm. Because everyone wants a better quality of life for themselves and for their families. And that's what a lot of people want, and they want stability, and they don't want to be fearful of the military, the police, the drug traffickers, the gangs, and everyone, wants the same thing for their family. So you can't blame people for trying to move.
So, one of the things that this brings up is, sort of how do we, the current challenges of the border and immigration and border management. And some of those challenges it sounds like, really have to have some kind of a holistic view on them that accounts for trade and people's relationships and all of the environment itself. So when you look at those kind of issues, how do you try to break them down if you were talking to somebody about how to start to understand from a voter perspective, to how to sort of go through some of the rhetoric that's out there?
Well, I think as a voter, people want to look at who is addressing the root causes of this migration. What does our foreign policy look like? What does our economic development policy look like? What is USAID doing in these countries to address the root causes of migration? Mm-hmm. So that would be a perspective that a voter would look at, would be our foreign policy vis-a-vis sending countries. Yeah. Another would be immigration reform, which is badly needed. Yeah. And you have to separate that between the 11 million undocumented people that have been here for 20 to 30 years and the new arrivals, right? So how do you figure out a way to address the 11 million people who are here, who are in many instances are being taken advantage of, are receiving low wages, do not have health insurance, do not have Social Security, may or may not be paying taxes, and how do we address that? So that's one and that has nothing to do with the border. That has to do with an existing situation that Congress has never addressed, right? And the border, people coming, it has to do with our asylum law, and I recommend a very quick fix for that.
Okay.
And the fix is change the asylum law. The asylum law states that if you are seeking asylum, your 2 feet have to be in the United States. And what I've seen on the people that I've interviewed and I've interacted with, they sell everything, they go into debt, they do everything they can so that their 2 feet can be in the United States and request asylum. And my solution is have technology, have a Zoom interview, have a vetting process either at the U.S. Embassy or the consulates. Present your case and say, the reason why I need asylum is because I fear persecution, because of my religion, because of my whatever, and be vetted. And then if you're told, okay, you have a good case, we'll give you the opportunity to enter the United States and petition for asylum. Because many people have to wait. The asylum system is broken. You wait years for your case to be heard. You then interact because you're given permission to go live your life. Life happens. You marry, you have children, and then 5 or 6 years later, when you have your case before an asylum judge, they're saying, oh no, forget about it. And you're like, okay, but now I have roots here. I have children. And then, so it's just a horrible way. It's a terrible process. And one of the things that I see is the human suffering that people from Venezuela, from Honduras, from El Salvador, coming through in instances the Darien Gap, coming through Mexico, coming to the border, only to be turned away. Why can't we just say, let's have a vetting process? We can use Zoom, we can use technology. There are different ways of dealing with this rather than putting people through this human suffering only to be turned away.
That's a perspective that I think we don't hear a lot. And I wanted to drill down on one specific point, which is, technology and how, in the near future, probably technology is going to change the way we address a lot of policies with respect to the border itself, with respect to immigration policy, and then with respect to foreign policy in general. So are there currently technological initiatives that sort of can show us the positive effects of applying technology in that context?
Well, there are countries that have, smart borders. When you travel throughout Europe, you don't have border checkpoints. You have a European Union passport, and that's pretty easy. A lot of airports are using this technology. So there is a solution. There are ways of doing this, but, we just have not invested in that technology here in the U.S.
Interesting. So one of the things that we think about a lot in this election season, because we're electing local offices, we're electing state offices, and then we're electing federal offices, including the Congress, the Senate, and the President. In the context of the border itself, the border region, how do you delineate among those different government entities what their responsibilities are? How do you do that?
Well, it's complicated because, for example, the city of Nogales, Arizona, deals constantly with flooding from Nogales, Sonora. Nogales, Sonora is at a higher elevation. When you have the monsoon season and it rains, all of that water flows into Nogales, Arizona. Sometimes there's, flooding, sometimes there's loss of life. And so the local government then has to respond to this. And they're like, okay, we don't have the wherewithal. That's not within our mandate. How do we address this? We need the federal government to intervene. There is an institution on the border, the International Boundary and Water Commission, Commission and its Mexican counterpart, the Comisión Internacional de Límites y Aguas, and they're supposed to address border infrastructure. But this is an institution that's been around since the 1898, and it requires cooperation. It's like we need to work together to address this problem. In Nogales, Arizona, you have an international wastewater treatment plant that treats a lot of the raw sewage from Nogales, Sonora, because it's the natural way to do it, because gravity works this way, right? And so how can you work together? How can you promote cross-border cooperation to address these kinds of issues? The same thing with transportation. You need to build roads, you need to build thoroughfares that are going to benefit the flow of commerce and goods, but it's not going to impact Arizona, it's not going to impact Sonora, it's just going to be an easy way for trucks to come through, but it requires cooperation. So one of the things that we advocate for is cross-border cooperation to address all kinds of issues, right? But it would require the federal government, the state government, the county government, and the local government to work together with a foreign government. At the local level, the municipal level, the state level, and the federal level, right? So it requires a lot of coming together to find meaningful solutions that are going to be beneficial and economically practical for both entities.
So one of the other, this sort of comes back to one of the things you talked about earlier with respect to asylum and that process. What are some of the successful models for immigrant integration that you've seen either here in Arizona or in other border states?
I think for me, a good model of immigrant integration is when an immigrant runs for office and wins. That to me is a model of immigrant integration, right? And so what you have here is, in many instances, an exclusionary policy. So we have 11 million people in this country that have been here for a while, that do not vote, that do not participate, and affect our economy. And many of the work much of the work that they do helps our quality of life. They're people that do gardening work, that clean homes, that work in low-paying jobs, so that we then can have low-paying services and goods, right? I mean, I would love for every worker to have all the accoutrements that I have: health insurance, a pension, vacation, sick leave, right? And all of that costs money. And so if we had the waiters or the gardeners or the landscapers or the maids with those benefits, would we be willing to pay the extra that it cost for them to have those benefits, right? And so it's something that we need to address. So I would love to see more education. I would love to see more civics education so that people are informed of how government works. Because one of the things that I see as a political scientist is a decline in people's knowledge base on civics and how government works.
Right.
And that's very scary to me.
Well, at Clean Elections, we think that this interview and others like it are part of the solution to that. So thank you very much for being with us today. You can check out all of our subject matter expert videos for this election cycle and prior election cycles on our website. There you'll also find information on how to cast your ballot and information on all of the candidates running for office from the federal level to the state level, including debates, candidate statements, and other information. We'll look forward to seeing you on our website and seeing you online.